Okay, I'm going to take you through chapter 13 now, which is the post office episode. And what's Levy doing with this episode? Well, of course, mostly she's exploring the hardships of immigrants in terms of, getting a job and then needing to keep hold of this job as well. In order to make ends meet and pay for their accommodation and so on. So that's basically what it's about. This chapter starts off with Gilbert joking about the inevitability of being a driver for the rest of his life. Characteristically positive, of course, which is what we've grown to expect of Gilbert by now. So it's a very positive take on what really is institutionalised racism in the UK. Moving on to page 312, we learn about the many interviews that Gilbert has had to go through. Levy, of course, is showing us how difficult it was for immigrants like Gilbert to get a job in the UK. And that once, of course, they were finally successful, they had to struggle to keep hold of it. The numerous excuses, the covert racism and the overt racism in various job interviews. One excuse, we have white women working here, and the men simply wouldn't stand for that. And Gilbert recounts the events with sort of, a good sense of humour. Once my breath had returned, enabling me to speak again, I asked him why he could not have told me this an hour before when I still had feeling in my backside. So we're right on his side. So the humour really enables us to warm to Gilbert, to see him as the hero of this story. Another interview, he recounts that he was asked whether he was a Christian, and satirically he points out that he felt actually that God was slipping from him like a freshly launched ship. There's lots of humour in this chapter that is just really, it feels very remarkable given the circumstances. And so this other excuse here is, of course, that his partner, the interviewer's partner, doesn't like coloured people. I nearly knock him into an early meeting with the Almighty. So there's lots of humour in here and lots of positivity. And then Gilbert goes on to explain that there were numerous interviews like this that took place, 6, where the job had sort of vanished with one look of his face. So we admire Gilbert's positive spirit and his resilience, and the humour in this keeps us firmly on his side. And Gilbert takes us through 2 specific interviews then, but obviously we learn that there are more, that this was just sort of the tip of the iceberg, if you like. And so we realise just how grateful he is when he finally gets this job as a driver. And so it's the kind of the irony and the humour with which he recounts this that makes this both entertaining and really quite powerful as well. He says, with irony, I was jubilant as a boy on his birthday when my hands finally caressed the cold of a steering wheel as a postman, driver for the post office. Eventually Gilbert is grateful for this offer of a job as a driver working in the post office, and then he kind of details the difficulties of this working environment. So Levy is now taking us from the general to the specific, and we see just how bad it gets, and we realise that this is a very precarious position he's in. One more word out of you, Coon, and you're out. So we've got, this is an awful job. The colleagues refusing to work for him, and then later at the King's Cross office, ignoring his polite requests for the correct information, you know, where the right sacks are for him to take. Being laughed at, and worse, being on the receiving end of racial abuse. So he's being ignored. Did I hear someone speak? And they're all chuckling. And he still, you know, remains polite. I could not afford to get into trouble. And so he's aware, he describes this as sort of sport or entertainment. And over here he says, man, I am better than a tea break. So he's very conscious of the fact that he is the entertainment for these working colleagues. So Gilbert recounts the abuse of the post office, particularly at the King's Cross office. Again, with quite a cheery, remarkably cheery tone. And I guess what this does is it gives some comic relief to an episode that would otherwise be really rather grave and sobering. And of course, you know, through the humour, we root for Gilbert, don't we? And we applaud his very witty response to this cross-eyed co-worker, where they say, oh, you know, go back to the jungle. When are you going back to the jungle? And he says, God, this is, you know, oh man, this is the best joke these 4 men have heard today. A coon, the jungle, what a lark. And so we clearly sense that he's heard all this before. And so he doesn't retaliate to start off with. He's quite restrained. Oi, Darky, you ain't answered me. When are you going back to where you belong? And it's as if something has snapped in Gilbert. And he says, but I just get here and I not fucked your wife yet. So that we kind of applaud that, because what, of course, Gilbert is doing is he is playing on the stereotypical perspective of a white man who believes, obviously, that black men would come and steal his wife. So it's a very, very witty remark as well, displaying his intelligence. And then we also enjoy his rather fanciful visions of how he might have retaliated. And we've all done that before, haven't we? When we go through what we could have said or what we could have done. And it's kind of, you know, we can relate to that as well. Let me see, I could have whacked his nose until it cracked or bled, or punched his stomach so his breakfast choke him, wind him with an elbow, smash his forehead into his mouth. So you can see there's all of this anger and frustration that comes out. But it's not recounted in a self-pitying way. We learn that Gilbert has had enough. And we learn about it in a very comedic way. Come, let's face it, I could have just blown on him to push him to the ground. But if I was to even tweak this man's cheek or matey pat his back, I knew I would lose my job. What could a Jamaican man do? I dropped my head. So although we've enjoyed his fanciful visions of how he might have retaliated, we realise that he can't. It's becoming, the tone's becoming, you know, quite poignant. This moment is becoming quite poignant, isn't it? So let's have a look at this. I said nothing. And then I cringed craven until my submission caused this man to leave hold. So it's Gilbert's submission, this image of himself as a whipped dog that is really really poignant, really powerful, really helps us to understand how difficult it must have been. Whipped dog is an interesting metaphor, isn't it? Because he is being treated as less than human, or almost it's being whipped, rather like he's maybe reminiscent of slavery even. And then the gunfire of cuss words that were popping and pinging around in his head. Of course, all of these, swear words that he can't utter, that it has to have to remain in his head. And then the gunfire, that metaphor there, echoes of chapter 17 and the war imagery there. But all of this is response to Hortense as well. Please, please, not on your knees. He reacts, I guess, well, Hortense feels it's very shocking and really rather strange and unexpected. We understand why he's responding in this way. But it's something that's not said. This chapter avoids being self-pitying because Gilbert doesn't take us through all of his feelings. We just know, we understand how he's feeling through his actions rather than his words. So it's very, very clever, this chapter as well, from Levy's. Levy's crafted this chapter very carefully because it reveals to us just how Gilbert was affected by this racism. It's not self-pitying. He's very much the hero of this novel because he is resilient and strong. So you've got to work out, rather like with chapter 17, you've got to work out what the function of the comedy is in this passage. In chapter 17, when I explored chapter 17, I took you through some of the kind of possible ways in which comedy might affect our interpretation of this novel. So have a look at that again if you can't remember them. But the underlying seriousness of this chapter cannot be avoided. This chapter is full of racial slurs like wog and coon and darky. So those abound in this chapter. And then, of course, the repeated idea that he could do nothing. Yeah, that he had to submit, that he couldn't afford to get into trouble. That one more word, coon, and you're out. That repeated idea that he could lose his job easily reinforces just how precarious a position these immigrants were in, and ensures that Levy achieves her aim of conveying, the difficulties experienced by immigrants from the colonies.